Every time you say the word Caribbean, you are naming these people. The sea, the region, an entire corner of the world carries their name. And there is a second word hiding inside it, one we still use for the darkest thing a human being can do to another: cannibal. That word was born right here from the name Carib, from a people the first Europeans swore were man-eaters, sweeping up this island chain in war canoes. For 500 years, the story stayed fixed. Fierce warriors had come out of South America, paddled north along the Lesser Antilles, and destroyed the gentle farmers who lived here before them. They killed the men. They kept the women. And they left behind an entire sea that still whispers their name. So when geneticists finally went looking for these conquerors, when they opened the graves and read the DNA of the ancient Caribbean, they expected the invasion to be written in the bone, a signature, a clean moment where one people replaced another. Instead, they found a silence they could not explain. In 2015, a team of French paleogeneticists published their results under a title that reads almost like a confession. They called the paper "Where Are the Caribs?" because the Caribs, the people ferocious enough to name a sea and a sin, had left almost no genetic trace of their conquest at all. To understand why one question shook Caribbean archaeology, I have to take you back before the war canoes, before Columbus, to the way these islands were actually filled. The Caribbean was not settled in one story. It was settled in two, thousands of years apart. The first people arrived by boat around 6,000 years ago, stone tool users who reached Cuba and spread eastward, island by island, through what archaeologists call the Archaic Age. Where exactly they came from is still unsettled. Their DNA matches no single living indigenous group, though their tools echo ones found in Belize, on the Central American mainland. Then, roughly 2,500 years ago, a second wave came. Farmers and potters moving north out of South America, up from the Orinoco, carrying cassava and clay and a related language we now call Arawakan. These were the ancestors of the people Columbus would eventually meet. On the larger northern islands, they became the Taino. On the smaller southern islands, the Windwards, their descendants were called the Ignari. And it was into the Ignari world that the Caribs were supposed to have come crashing. We think we know how many died and how ferociously because Europeans told us. When Columbus reached the islands in 1492 and again in 1493, he described a paradise split between two kinds of people: the gentle Arawak, ripe for conversion and labor, and the savage Carib, who ate their enemies. It was a tidy division. It was also, as we will see, extraordinarily convenient. In 2020, a team led by the Harvard geneticist David Reich published the largest study of ancient human DNA ever attempted in the Americas. 263 ancient genomes read from bones scattered across the islands. Working alongside William Keegan, an archaeologist who had spent more than 40 years digging in the Caribbean, they could finally test the old story of invasion against the genetic record itself. The first thing that broke was the body count. Columbus had written to his royal patrons that 1 million people lived on the single island of Hispaniola. Later, the friar Bartolomé de las Casas would raise the figure to 3 million. But a young researcher in Reich's lab, Harold Ringbauer, had built a new method, reading the shared segments of DNA that relatives leave inside one another's genomes, to estimate how many people had actually lived here. His answer, for Hispaniola and Puerto Rico together, was somewhere between 10,000 and 50,000. Not millions, tens of thousands. The Ceramic Age Caribbean, it turned out, had been founded by a strikingly small population. People buried on different islands, separated by open water, often turned out to be close genetic relatives, cousins scattered across an archipelago. This was not a crowded, teeming world of millions waiting to be conquered. It was a thin, mobile, tightly connected web of families. I want to be careful with this because it is the part that gets misread. The smaller number does not shrink the catastrophe that came after. What Europe did to these islands was, in Reich's own words, a systematic program of cultural erasure. But it does change the shape of the story we inherited. The pre-contact Caribbean was smaller, tighter, and far more continuous than 5 centuries of chroniclers had claimed. And into that continuity, a great replacing invasion simply would not fit. The strangest piece of evidence had actually been sitting in plain sight for 400 years, written down by a French missionary. When the Dominican friar Raymond Breton lived among the Kalinago of Dominica in the 1600s, he recorded something that would puzzle scholars for centuries. The men and the women, he wrote, did not always speak the same language. The women used one set of words for the sun, the moon, the ordinary business of life. The men, especially in council and in war, use another. For 300 years, that looked like proof of the invasion. The explanation seemed obvious and grim. The Carib men had killed the Ignari men and taken their wives, so the women went on speaking the old Arawakan tongue while the conquerors kept their own. A language split, frozen into grammar, testifying to a massacre. Then, in the 20th century, linguists finally took the two languages apart. And the everyday language of the Kalinago, the one spoken by everyone, women and men, mothers and children alike, was not the language of South American Caribs at all. It was Arawakan. In its bones, it was a language of the Ignari, the people who had supposedly been wiped out. The famous men's speech was not a separate, conquering tongue. It was a specialized register, a Caribbean-flavored jargon the men used to mark themselves, to advertise a connection to the powerful Kalina peoples of the mainland. It worked more like a trade code than a mother tongue, so the women had not preserved the language of the conquered. Everyone was still speaking it. The conquest, if it happened at all, had left the loser's language on every tongue on the island. The Pottery said the same impossible thing. Archaeologists work by a rough rule. When one people violently replaces another, the record tends to break. Old styles vanish, new ones appear, and there is a gap between them. But when researchers like the Leiden archaeologist Corinne Hoffman traced the ceramics of the Lesser Antilles across the crucial centuries, they found no clean rupture matching an invasion. They found a new style, called Kayo, emerging around the 1200s and blending with what came before, developing in place rather than crashing in from outside. There was no archaeological earthquake where the Caribs were supposed to have landed. And then, the DNA. When Florent Mendisco and Marie-France Deguilieu, paleogeneticists at the University of Bordeaux, sequenced ceramic age remains from the Lesser Antilles, they were hunting specifically for the fingerprint of those mainland invaders. That was the entire point of the study. What they found were people who fit with the earlier islanders and with populations of northern South America, but not the sharp signal of a distinct new race sweeping in and erasing everyone before it. Later work, including ancient genomes analyzed by Catherine Nagela at the Max Planck Institute and folded into Reich's Great Survey, pointed the same direction. The ceramic age Caribbean read, genetically, like one long continuous story. The islanders at the end were the descendants of the islanders at the beginning. That is what the 2015 paper had really been asking. If the Caribs conquered these islands, replaced these men, seized these women, then where are they in the blood? Where is the invasion? The answer that has emerged is stranger, and far more human than any war canoe story. The fearsome Caribs as a separate, invading race were to a large degree an idea, and a useful one. Under Spanish law, indigenous people could not simply be enslaved at will, except for one written exception, aimed at a single crime, cannibalism. A people accused of eating human flesh, a people labeled Carib, could be seized, sold, and worked to death legally. The word cannibal was never only a slur, it was a license. And so the label Carib spread across the map wherever there were people worth enslaving and resistance worth breaking. Beneath that label, the reality seems to have been this. The islanders of the Southern Antilles, the Arawakan-speaking descendants of the Ignari, built deep trading and political ties with the Kalina, peoples of the mainland. Some scholars, like the historian Sued Badillo, argue they took on a Carib identity the way people have always borrowed the menace of a powerful neighbor, adopting the men's speech, the mainland alliances, the fearsome name. They did not have to be conquered to become Caribs. They chose it, and through trade, marriage, and alliance rather than mass invasion, a new identity settled over an old population. The people who named the Caribbean were, in large part, the people who had lived there all along. I have worked through a lot of these ancestry stories, and this is one of the very few that reversed itself in my hands as I researched it. I started out expecting to explain a conquest. What the evidence kept describing instead was a people who survived by changing what they were called. The invasion that named a sea turned out to be more than anything a story about identity, about who gets to name whom, and what those names are then used to justify. And this is what the extinction narrative always leaves out. The Kalinago are not gone. On the eastern coast of Dominica, there is a stretch of land, around 3,700 acres, set aside in 1903 and renamed the Kalinago territory in 2015. Roughly 3,000 Kalinago people live there today, carrying the Native American and African ancestry that modern genetic surveys have confirmed. Their old language, Kalinago proper, fell silent around 1920, but it did not fully die. It had already traveled, carried by the Garifuna, the descendants of Kalinago and African families exiled to Central America, who still speak a living descendant of that island tongue today. The people Europe called cannibals, then called conquerors, then called extinct, did none of those things on Europe's schedule. They were mislabeled, written off, and they are still here. We like to think of DNA as the thing that finally tells us the truth about the past, the hard evidence beneath the soft stories. But the Kalinago mystery is really about the opposite. The bones and the genomes did not reveal a hidden invasion. They revealed the absence of one and forced us to ask why the story was ever told in the first place. A sea took its name from a conquest that the blood cannot find. And sometimes the most important thing genetics can do is not fill in the myth, but show us the exact shape of the space where the myth used to be and hand the people still standing inside it their real history back. Thanks for watching.